The cargo bay of the salvage freighter was cold and dark when the dockworkers found him. They had been unloading scrap metal from a dead ship found drifting near the outer rim. And none of them expected to find a living child wrapped in strange silver cloth between the rusted containers. The baby did not cry. He simply looked up at them with eyes that made the hardened workers step back in fear. His eyes were gold. Not the amber color that some humans were born with, not the yellowish tint of jaundice or sickness, but pure molten gold that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The workers called for the station's medical officer immediately. I'm sure if they were dealing with a human child or something else entirely. Vegas Station was a mining colony on the edge of known. It was not a place where miracles happened. It was a place where people worked themselves to exhaustion, pulling valuable minerals from asteroids. Where dreams went to die and where the Galactic Council's laws meant very little. The station was home to humans who had nowhere else to go, outcasts and refugees who had built a life in the darkness between stars. Grace. Holloway had been the medical officer on Vegas Station for 15 years. She was a tired woman with gray streaks in her brown hair and lines on her face that told stories of too many sleepless nights. She had delivered babies in storage closets, performed surgery with makeshift tools, and watched too many people die from accidents that better equipment could have prevented. Nothing surprised her anymore, until she saw the baby's eyes. She took him from the trembling dock worker and held him close. The child was perfectly healthy, no signs of malnutrition or abuse, no indication of where he had come from or who had left him in that cargo bay. The silver cloth he was wrapped in dissolved into dust the moment Grace tried to examine it. Leaving no trace of its origin, she should have reported him to the Galactic Council. Every birth, every death. Every new resident on any station or colony was supposed to be registered with the Council's central database. The 5 elder species who ruled the galaxy demanded a complete accounting of all beings under their jurisdiction, especially humans. Humanity was a young species, barely 300 years into spacefaring, and the Council watched them carefully, but something made Grace hesitate. Perhaps it was the way the baby looked at her, as if he understood far more than any infant should. Perhaps it was the protective instinct that rose up in her chest. A feeling she had not experienced since her own children had grown and left the station. Perhaps it was simply the knowledge that the Council would take this unusual child away and she would never see him again. She named him Cole. After her grandfather, who had been one of the first humans to work in deep space, she filed the standard paperwork, but she marked his eye color as brown and listed his genetic profile as unremarkable. She claimed he was the orphan son of a miner who had died in an accident, and no one questioned her. On Vegas Station, people minded their own business. For 12 years, Cole grew up in Grace's small quarters on the station. He was a quiet boy, thoughtful and observant, with few friends, but a gentle nature that made everyone who met him feel at ease. He learned to read faster than any child Grace had ever seen, devouring every book and data file he could find about history, science, and the galaxy beyond the station's walls. But it was his gift with machines that truly set him apart. Cole could fix anything. Broken equipment that the station's engineers had given up on would start working again after he spent time with it. He did not seem to repair things in the normal way, with tools and spare parts. He would simply sit with a malfunctioning device, place his hands on it, and somehow understand what was wrong. The miners started bringing him their personal equipment, and then the station's critical systems. By the time he was 10, Cole was responsible for keeping half the station running. The miners whispered that he was blessed. Some said he had been touched by the old gods that humans had worshipped before they reached the stars. Others believed he was something more than human, perhaps a hybrid created by one of the elder species. Grace heard the whispers and worried, but Cole remained humble and kind. Never using his abilities for personal gain, he asked about his origins only once. Grace told him the truth, as far as she knew it. He had been found in a cargo bay with no identification, no parents, and no explanation. She did not tell him about the silver cloth that had turned to dust, or about the way his golden eyes had frightened the dock workers. She wanted to protect him from questions she could not answer. Cole accepted her explanation without complaint. He told her that she was his mother in every way that mattered, and he never brought up the subject again. but Grace sometimes caught him staring out the viewport at the stars, his golden eyes reflecting the distant light. And she knew that part of him was searching for something he could not name. The day everything changed began like any other day on Vega Station. Cole was 13 years old, tall for his age, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and those impossible golden eyes that he had learned to keep downcast around strangers. He was helping repair a filtration system in the lower levels when the announcement came over the station speakers. A Galactic Council inspector had arrived. For a routine census, the Varath were one of the 5 elder species, beings made of living crystal that could reshape their bodies at will. They were ancient and powerful, and they served as the Council's administrators and record keepers. A Varath inspector visited each station every few years to verify population counts and ensure compliance with Council regulations. It was normally a boring process that no one worried about. Cole was walking through the main corridor. When he saw the inspector for the first time, the Varath was beautiful in a terrifying way, its crystalline body catching the light and splitting it into rainbows that danced across the walls. It was interviewing residents one by one, scanning their identification chips and comparing them against the central database. Cole tried to walk past without being noticed. He kept his head down and his eyes on the floor, moving with the crowd of workers heading to the next shift. But the Varath turned toward him as if drawn by an invisible force. Their eyes met, gold meeting crystal, and the inspector froze. The sound that came from the Varath was unlike anything Cole had ever heard. It was a resonance, a vibration that started low and built until every glass surface in the corridor shattered into fragments. People screamed and ran. Cole stood motionless, unable to look away from the crystalline being that was staring at him with what could only be described as terror. "Impossible," the Varath said, its voice like wind chimes caught in a hurricane. "This cannot be. You cannot exist." Within 3 hours, the sky above Vega Station was filled with Council warships. Cole watched them arrive through the viewport of Grace's quarters, his golden eyes reflecting the massive vessels that had come for him. Grace held his hand and told him she would not let them take him. But they both knew she had no power to stop what was coming. The Council soldiers were not gentle. They pulled Cole from Grace's arms while she screamed and fought against them. She received a formal notice that her foster son was being relocated to Axiom Prime for evaluation, and a warning that any attempt to contact him or interfere with Council business would result in her immediate execution. Cole did not resist. He walked calmly between the armored soldiers, his golden eyes dry and steady. But as the transport lifted off from Vega Station, he pressed his hand against the viewport and watched the only home he had ever known shrink into the distance. Somewhere deep inside him, beneath the fear and confusion, something ancient was beginning to stir. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time was finally waking up. The transport ship that carried Cole across the galaxy for 6 weeks. He was kept in a small white room with no windows, fed bland nutrient paste, and allowed no contact with any other being. The door was sealed with technology he did not recognize, and the walls hummed with energy that made his skin tingle whenever he touched them. He was not a prisoner in the traditional sense, but he was certainly not free. He spent most of his time sitting on the narrow bed, thinking about Grace in Vega Station. He wondered if she was safe, if the Council had punished her for hiding him all those years. He thought about the miners who had brought him their broken equipment, the children he had played with in the corridors, the life he had built in that cold and dirty place. It had not been a perfect life, but it had been his. When the transport finally landed, Cole was escorted through corridors of gleaming metal into a city that took his breath away. Axiom Prime was the heart of galactic civilization, a planet that had been transformed over millions of years into a single massive structure. Towers of crystal and stone rose so high they disappeared into the clouds. Rivers of light flowed through the streets instead of water. Beings of every species walked and flew and slithered past. More diversity than Cole had seen in his entire life on Vega Station. But he had no time to marvel at the wonders around him. The soldiers brought him to a building in the center of the city, a structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside, he was placed in another white room. This one filled with equipment he did not understand. Machines scanned his body from every angle. Needles drew his blood. Device S measured his brain activity while lights flashed in his eyes. For 3 days, the tests continued without explanation. Cole asked questions that no one answered. He demanded to know why he had been taken, what they were looking for, when he would be allowed to go home. The beings who conducted the tests, members of all 5 elder species, looked at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear to something that might have been reverenced on the 4th day. They brought him before the Galactic Council itself. The chamber was enormous. A circular room with walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the center was a raised platform where Cole was made to stand. Around him, arranged in 5 sections like slices of a pie, sat representatives of the elder species who ruled the known universe. The Varath were there. Hundreds of crystalline beings whose bodies chimed softly as they moved. The Solani filled tanks of water that rose from floor to ceiling, their amphibious forms graceful and alien. The Kreth clustered together in organized formations, their insectoid bodies clicking and buzzing with communication. The monumentals sat on massive thrones carved from asteroid stone, each one standing 30 feet tall. In the shade drifted in pools of darkness, their forms barely visible. More shadow than substance, Cole had never felt so small in his entire life. A shade elder drifted forward, separating from the darkness to float before Cole's platform. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. "We have examined you," the shade said. Its name, Cole would later learn, was Whisper of the Void. "We have tested your blood, your cells, your genetic structure down to the smallest component. We have compared our findings against every database in the known universe, and we have reached a conclusion that none of us believed possible." The chamber fell silent. Every being present seemed to hold their breath, carry the blood of the architects. Cole did not understand. He had heard the word before in old stories and legends that humans told about the origins of the universe. The architects were supposed to be myths, gods from before history, beings who had created the stars and planets and all life that existed. They were not real. They could not be real. But the reaction of the elder species told him otherwise. The Varath began to resonate, their crystalline bodies singing a mournful note that made Cole's bones vibrate. The Solani churned in their tanks, creating whirlpools of agitated water. The Kreth clicked and buzzed with such intensity that the sound became painful. The monumentals gripped their thrones until cracks appeared in the stone. And the shade drew together, their darkness deepening until no light could penetrate their section of the chamber. "High Commander," Korath of the Monumentals rose from his throne, his voice shaking the floor beneath Cole's feet. "This is impossible. Humans are nothing. They are barely civilized, barely capable of surviving beyond their own planet. They cannot carry divine blood. And yet the evidence stands before us," replied First Mind skittering through Data of the Kreth. Its voice a rapid series of clicks, translated by a device around its neck. "The genetic markers are unmistakable. We have fragments of architect material recovered from ruins across the galaxy. This child's cells match those fragments with 99% accuracy. He is more architect than any being that has existed since they departed." Cole found his voice at last. Who were the architects? What does this mean? Whisper of the Void drifted closer, and Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The architects were the first beings in existence. They arose at the beginning of time itself, and they shaped the universe according to their will. They created the stars. They formed the planets. They seeded life across 1,000 galaxies, and from their experiments, all species eventually arose. We, the elder races, carry traces of their design. But you, human child, carry their actual blood. They left, added the Solani High Priestess, her voice bubbling through the water of her tank. 10 million years ago, the architects vanished from the universe. No one knows why. No one knows where they went. They left behind only ruins and mysteries and the fading echoes of their power. We have searched for answers for millions of years. Cole's mind was spinning. He thought of his ability to fix machines, the way equipment responded to his touch. He thought of his golden eyes that had frightened everyone who saw them. He thought of the strange dreams he sometimes had, dreams of places and beings he had never seen. Why me? He asked. Why would the architects put their blood in a human orphan? None of the elder species had an answer. For months afterward, Cole remained on Axiom Prime. He was no longer kept in a white room, but was instead given quarters in a secure facility. Comfortable, but closely monitored. Scientists from all 5 elder species studied him constantly, taking more samples, running more tests, asking endless questions he could not answer. He learned more about the architects during this time. He learned that every elder species was, in some way, a creation of the ancient beings. The Varath had been designed to work with crystal and light. The Solani had been made to understand water and flow. The Kreth had been given the gift of collective thought. The Monumentals had been shaped from the very bones of planets. And the Shade had been born from the darkness between stars. Humanity, everyone had believed, was an accident. A young species that had evolved naturally on an unremarkable planet. With no connection to the great mystery of existence, now they knew differently. Now they knew that humanity was the architect's final experiment, their last children. Created for a purpose that no one yet understood. The council debated what to do with Cole. Some demanded his immediate death, fearful of what he might become. Others wanted to dissect him, to extract the precious genetic material and claim it for their own species. A faction led by ambitious members of the Kreth proposed using him as a tool, a key to unlock the architect, vaults, and technologies scattered across the universe. Cole listened to their debates. Through walls that could not contain his growing awareness, something was changing inside him. Each day, he understood more than he had the day before. Languages he had never studied began to make sense. Symbols in the architect ruins that scientists had puzzled over for millennia became clear to him as simple as reading a children's book, and he began to remember not memories from his own short life, but older memories, deeper memories, echoes of consciousness that stretched back through time to the very beginning. He remembered beings of light and thought who had looked upon an empty universe and decided to fill it with wonders. He remembered the joy of creation and the sorrow of leaving it. Behind, he remembered why the architects had gone, and he understood, at last, why they had hidden their blood in a human child on a forgotten mining station at the edge of the galaxy. He was not an accident. He was not a mistake. He was a message, waiting 10 million years to be delivered. 3 years passed on Axiom Prime. Cole turned 14, then 15, then 16, then 17, all within the walls of his gilded prison. He was treated well by some standards, given food and clothing and access to information, but he was never allowed to leave, never permitted to contact Grace or anyone from his old life, and never treated as anything other than a specimen to be studied. The elder species could not agree on what to do with him. Their debates stretched on endlessly, each faction pushing their own agenda, none willing to compromise. Meanwhile, Cole sat in his comfortable cell and grew in ways none of them could measure. The visions began on his 17th birthday. He was lying in bed when the first one struck, a flash of light behind his eyes that expanded into something vast and overwhelming. Suddenly, he was no longer in his small room on Axiom Prime. He was standing in a place that existed outside of normal space, a realm of pure thought and energy where the architects had once gathered to discuss the fate of existence. He saw them clearly for the first time. They were not gods in the way he had imagined, not distant and cold and unknowable. They were people in their own way. They laughed and argued and loved and feared. They had families and friends and disagreements. They were simply people who happened to be powerful beyond imagination, and they were terrified. The vision showed him a meeting that had taken place 10 million years ago. The greatest minds of the architect civilization had gathered to hear a report from their scientists, a report that would change everything. The universe they had discovered was dying. Not slowly, not in the distant future, but fundamentally and irreversibly. The very laws that held reality together were beginning to unravel. Cole watched as the architects tried everything to stop the collapse. They built machines that spanned galaxies. They rewrote the equations of existence. They poured every resource of their vast civilization into finding a solution. And they failed. But they did not give up. If they could not stop the collapse from within the universe, they would find another way. They would travel beyond the boundaries of existence itself, into realms that no being had ever explored, and search for an answer there. It was a journey that might take millions of years. It's a journey from which they might never return. Before they left, they made preparations. They scattered their knowledge across the galaxy, hidden in ruins and codes that their children might one day decipher. They embedded instructions in the genetic material of every species they had created, dormant programs waiting for the right trigger. And they created one final experiment, a species that would carry their blood more directly than any other. That species was humanity. Cole understood now why humans were different from the elder races. The Varath, the Solani, the Kreth, the Monumentals, the Shade. All of them had been created early in the architect's work. They were refined and specialized, perfect for their intended purposes. But perfection had limits. A perfect creation could not grow beyond what it was designed to be. Humanity was different. Humanity was rough and unfinished, capable of both great evil and great good, able to adapt and change and evolve in ways the elder races could not. The architects had not perfected humanity because they wanted humans to perfect themselves. They had given humanity the potential for unlimited growth. And then they had hidden a seed of architect blood among them, waiting for the day when it would be needed. That day had come. The collapse the architects had discovered was no longer a distant threat. It was happening now in subtle ways that only Cole's awakening senses could detect. The fabric of reality was wearing thin at the edges of the universe. Within 1,000 years, perhaps less, everything would simply cease to exist. Cole woke from the vision with tears streaming down his face. He finally understood who he was and why he had been born. He was not just a child with strange eyes. He was a bridge between what had been and what needed to be. He was the key to saving everything. But first, he needed to escape. The suppression fields that kept his abilities contained had seemed impenetrable. The walls of his cell were reinforced with materials that could withstand the force of a star. Guards monitored his every movement, and sensors tracked his biological functions constantly. Escape should have been impossible. It was not. One night, Cole simply decided that the suppression fields would stop working, and they did. He decided that the walls would let him pass, and they parted like water. He walked through the facility unseen, not because he was invisible, but because no one thought to look where he was walking. The guards continued their patrols. The sensors continued their scanning. But Cole moved through them like a ghost, already gone before anyone realized he had left. He left a message burned into the wall of his cell, written in the language of the architects that only he could read. It said simply, "I am going home." But he did not go to Vegas Station. Not yet. First, he had work to do. Cole traveled across the galaxy using methods that should have been impossible. He stepped through folds in space that the elder races did not know existed. He moved faster than light, without using any technology they could understand. He appeared on worlds thousands of light years apart within hours. Leaving the Council's trackers confused and frustrated, he visited Architect, ruins that had been sealed for millions of years. On a dead moon at the edge of the galaxy, he found a vault that contained the Architect's medical knowledge. Cures for diseases that had plagued countless species throughout history. On a planet of eternal storms, he discovered their library, records of civilizations and events that had been forgotten before the elder races were born. In the heart of a dying star, he located their forge, tools that could reshape matter at the atomic level, each ruin open to his touch. Machines that had been silent since before life existed on Earth hummed to life in his presence. Systems that the greatest minds of 5 civilizations had failed to activate responded to Cole as if they had been waiting for him, and in each ruin, he found pieces of the solution. The architects had not left their children without hope. They had known that the collapse would continue in their absence, and they had prepared a way to stop it. The solution was complex, requiring technology and cooperation on a scale the galaxy had never seen. It would need the combined efforts of every species, working together for generations, to implement. But there was one thing the architects had not been able to provide, one element that their own civilization, for all its power, had lacked. The solution required someone who could see existence from the outside, someone who had grown up small and struggling, someone who understood what it meant to face impossible odds and refuse to surrender. It required a human perspective. Cole began to understand that his childhood on Vega Station had not been a weakness or a mistake. It was essential to who he needed to become. The architects had been too powerful, too removed from the struggles of ordinary existence. They could not see solutions that seemed obvious to someone who had grown up fixing broken machines in a mining colony. Grace had raised him to be resourceful, to make do with what he had, to never give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. Those lessons were now more valuable than all the knowledge in the architect vaults. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was in chaos. Reports of Cole's appearances came from across the universe, each one more impossible than the last. The elder species argued about what it meant, whether he was a threat to be destroyed or a power to be controlled. They mobilized their fleets, searching for the human teenager who had somehow become the most important being in existence. They found nothing. Cole was always one step ahead, guided by knowledge that stretched back to the beginning of time. He was preparing for what came next, gathering the tools and information he would need to convince a galaxy of frightened species to work together, because the collapse was accelerating. Every day, the edges of the universe grew a little more unstable. Every day, reality frayed a little more at the seams. Cole could feel it now, a constant pressure at the back of his mind, countdown that no one else could hear. He had maybe 50 years before it was too late. Maybe less. On the day he finally felt ready, Cole stopped running. He went to Earth, to the blue and green planet where humanity had been born, to the place where the architects had planted their final seed. He stood in a cave that humans had always thought was natural, but was actually the first architect structure ever built on that world, and he sent a message to every receiver in the galaxy. It was time for the universe to learn the truth. The message reached every corner of the galaxy within seconds. It played on council broadcasts in private communicators, on military channels and civilian networks, on the screens of emperors and the devices of common workers. Every being with access to any form of receiver heard the voice of Cole Archer, the human orphan with golden eyes who had become the most wanted individual in the universe. "My name is Cole Archer," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Some of you know me as the child who was taken from Vega Station 4 years ago. Others know me as the bearer of architect blood, the subject of endless debates and searches. But who I am matters less than what I have to tell you." He paused, and across 1,000,000,000,000 worlds, beings of every species leaned closer to their screens. The universe is dying. Not slowly, not in some distant future you can ignore, but now. The architects discovered this truth 10 million years ago, and they left to find a solution. They hid their knowledge in ruins across the galaxy. They planted their blood in humanity, waiting for someone like me to awaken and deliver their message. Cole's golden eyes seemed to look directly at each viewer, as if he could see them through the screens. "I have found that solution. It exists, it can be implemented. But it requires something the architects could never achieve on their own. It requires all of us, every species, every civilization, working together. I am not asking for your worship or your obedience. I am offering you a choice. Join me and survive, or oppose me and perish with everything else." He gave coordinates for Earth, for the cave where he stood, and then the message ended. The Galactic Council's response was exactly what Cole had expected. High Admiral Sarantha of the Solani was given command of the largest fleet ever assembled. Ships from all 5 elder species gathered at a staging point near Earth's solar system. Enough firepower to crack planets and extinguish stars. The council had debated briefly, but fear had won over reason. Cole was too dangerous to be allowed to live. Whatever he claimed about saving the universe was surely a trick, a manipulation designed to elevate humanity above its proper place. The fleet entered Earth's solar system in perfect formation, blocking out the stars with their numbers. Sarantha floated in her command sphere at the center of the flagship, her amphibious form suspended in water that had been blessed by the High Priestess herself. She had been chosen for this mission because she had never failed. Her record was perfect. Her loyalty to the Council was absolute. "All ships report ready," her second-in-command announced. "We have visual confirmation of the target location. One human life sign detected." "One child," Sarantha said, her voice rippling through the water. "We have brought enough weapons to destroy 100 worlds, and our enemy is one human child." "A child with architect blood," her second reminded her. "A child who escaped the most secure facility in the galaxy. A child who has accessed technology we cannot understand." Sarantha considered this. She had seen the reports, the footage of sealed vaults opening at Cole's touch, the impossible journeys across space without any detectable means of travel. Part of her, the part that had spent centuries studying the mysteries of the universe, wanted to hear what he had to say. But orders were orders. "All ships advance," she commanded. "Prepa. Reprimary weapons. We end this now." Fleet moved toward Earth, a wall of destruction that no force in the galaxy could withstand. On the planet below, Cole stood at the entrance of the Architect Cave and watched them come. His golden eyes reflected the distant lights of 10,000 warships, and he felt no fear. He had known this would happen. The elder species were too afraid, too invested in their own power, to accept help from a human. They would try to destroy what they could not control. It was the same pattern that had repeated throughout history. The same fear that had kept the galaxy divided for millions of years. Cole raised his hands. What happened next would be debated by historians. For as long as history continued, some would say that Cole simply wished the fleet to stop, and reality bent to accommodate his desire. Others would claim that he activated architect technology hidden throughout the solar system, weapons that had been waiting since before Earth's sun was born. A few would believe that the architects themselves, watching from beyond the boundaries of existence, reached back through time to protect their heir. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any. Of those explanations, Cole did not attack the fleet. He did not destroy the ships or kill the beings inside them. Instead, he showed them what he had seen. Every mind in the fleet, from High Admiral Sarantha to the lowest maintenance worker, experienced the visions simultaneously. They saw the universe as the architects had seen it, vast and beautiful and dying. They saw the collapse that was already beginning, a fraying at the edges of reality that would eventually consume everything. They saw the civilizations that would be lost, the species that would be erased, the stars that would simply cease to burn, and they saw the solution. It was not a weapon or a machine. It was a choice. A choice to set aside fear and division, to work together as one galaxy instead of 5 competing empires. To trust a human teenager with golden eyes because he was the only one who could guide them through what was coming. The vision lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Sarantha floated in her command sphere, tears streaming from her eyes and dissolving into the blessed water around her. She had lived for 3,000 years. She had seen wonders and horrors beyond counting, but she had never experienced anything like the clarity that now filled her mind. "All ships hold position," she ordered, her voice shaking. "Stand down weapons. I repeat, stand down all weapons." Her second-in-command stared at her in disbelief. "High Admiral, our orders are clear. The Council demands his destruction. The Council is wrong." Sarantha pressed her webbed hands against the walls of her sphere. "They are wrong, and they have been wrong about many things. This child, this human, he is not our enemy. He is perhaps the only friend any of us have ever had." She opened a channel to Cole's location, to the cave where the young man with golden eyes stood waiting. "I am High Admiral Sarantha of the Solani Combined Fleet," she said. "On behalf of myself and those who serve under me, I offer you our allegiance. We have seen the truth you carry. Tell us what you need us to do." Cole's response was gentle, almost kind. "Thank you, Admiral. Tell your crews they are safe. Tell them I bear no anger for those who followed orders they believed were just. And tell them that the real work begins now." One by one, the other ships in the fleet reported their surrender. Some captains refused, tried to continue the attack, but their crews would not follow them. The vision had been too powerful, too convincing. They had seen the death of everything, and they had seen the path to survival. No loyalty to the Council could overcome that knowledge. The Galactic Council itself fell into chaos when word reached. Axiom Prime. Some members demanded Sarantha's execution for treason. Others called for a full investigation into Cole's claims. A few, the wisest among them, began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Over the following weeks, Cole met with representatives of every species willing to talk. He did not demand submission or worship. He explained patiently and carefully what needed to be done. He showed them the architect plans he had recovered from the sealed vaults. He answered their questions without arrogance or condescension, and slowly and possibly. The galaxy began to change. The Varath were the second elder species to offer their allegiance. Drawn by the beauty of the architect designs, the Kreth followed, recognizing the logic of cooperation over competition. The Shade came next, their ancient connection to the architect's awakening in the presence of Cole's blood. Even the Monumentals, proud and stubborn, eventually bent their massive heads and agreed to join. Not everyone accepted the new reality. Factions within each species refused to follow a human, refused to believe that the universe was truly dying, refused to abandon the old ways that had served them for millions of years. Cole did not force them. He simply continued his work, trusting that time would prove him right. It did. Within a year, the first observable signs of the collapse became visible to Council sensors. A region of space at the far edge of the galaxy simply stopped existing, winking out like a candle flame in a storm. It was small, barely noticeable, but it confirmed everything Cole had claimed. The holdouts surrendered within days. The Galactic Council officially dissolved itself and reformed as the Unity, a coalition of all species dedicated to implementing the architect's solution. Cole was not named as their leader or ruler. He refused any title beyond his own name. But everyone understood that the human orphan with golden eyes was the one who had saved them from their own fear. The real work was only beginning. 10 years passed since the day the fleet surrendered above Earth. The galaxy had been transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had lived before Cole's awakening. Species that had been enemies for millions of years now worked side by side. Technologies that had been hoarded and hidden were shared freely. A civilization that had been fractured into competing empires had become something closer to a family. The great work consumed everything. Every resource, every mind, every hand that could contribute was dedicated to implementing the architect's solution. It was the largest construction project in the history of existence, a machine that would span light years and generations. The Varath used their mastery of crystal and light to create energy matrices of impossible efficiency. These structures floated between stars, gathering power from the universe itself, channeling it toward the points where reality was weakest. The Solani mapped the currents of space-time with a precision that had never been achieved before, identifying exactly where the collapse was spreading and how fast. The Kreth built the physical components of the great machine, their collective intelligence allowing them to work in perfect coordination across vast distances. The Monumentals provided raw materials on a scale that defied imagination. They harvested dead stars for their dense cores, dismantled asteroids and moons, gathered the building blocks of creation from every corner of the galaxy, and the Shade moved through dimensions that other species could not perceive, carrying messages and small components faster than light, connecting the far-flung parts of the great work into a single functioning whole. Humanity did what humanity had always done. They solved problems. They found shortcuts. They refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. A human engineer discovered a way to increase the efficiency of the Varith energy matrices by 30%. Using techniques borrowed from the ancient, fusion reactors of Earth, a human mathematician proved a theorem that allowed the Solani maps to be completed decades ahead of schedule. Human workers filled the gaps between the specialized skills of the elder species, adapting to whatever role was needed. Learning new abilities with a speed that amazed their alien colleagues, Cole guided all of it, but he did not control it. He had learned during his years on Vega Station that the best way to help people was not to do everything for them, but to show them what needed to be done and trust them to find their own way. He shared the architect knowledge freely, held nothing back, and watched with wonder as a galaxy of different species accomplished things he could never have achieved alone. He thought often about Grace during those years. He had sent messages to Vega Station, but he had not been able to visit. The work was too important, the demands on his time too great. He told himself that there would be time later, after the great work was complete, to see the woman who had raised him. On the 10th anniversary of the fleet's surrender, Cole finally found a moment of peace. The great machine was nearly finished. In a few more months, they would be ready to activate it and begin the process of healing the universe. The collapse had been slowed, but not stopped, and large regions of space had already been lost. But they were going to win. For the first time since his awakening, Cole allowed himself to believe that everything would be all right. He went to Vega Station. The mining colony had changed in the years since his departure. It was larger now, more prosperous, a hub for human workers contributing to the great work. But Grace's quarters were in the same plaque they had always been, small set of rooms near the medical bay where she had spent her life caring for others. She was 73 years old. Her hair was completely white now, and her hands trembled slightly when she moved. But her eyes were the same, sharp and kind and full of a love that had not diminished despite years of separation. When she opened her door and saw Cole standing there, she did not bow or tremble or treat him like the most important being in the galaxy. She slapped him across the face. "You never wrote," she said. "I watched you on the broadcasts, saw you talking to emperors and admirals, and you could not find time to send your mother a single message?" Cole smiled, and for a moment his golden eyes were just the eyes of the boy she had found in a cargo bay. "I am sorry, Grace. I should have." She pulled him into her quarters and made him tea, the same bitter brew she had always served him when he was young. They sat together in her small kitchen, and Cole told her everything. He had told her about the visions and the architects, about the collapse and the great work, about the burden he carried and the fears he could share with no one else. Grace listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she took his hand in her trembling fingers. "You were always special," she said. "From the moment I saw those golden eyes, I knew you were meant for something beyond this station, beyond anything I could imagine. But you were also always human. Do not forget that, Cole. Your power comes from them, from the architects, but your heart comes from us. From me." Cole held her hand and felt tears running down his face. "I will not forget, I promise." Through the night, sharing memories and laughter, and the simple comfort of being together. When morning came, Cole had to leave. The final preparations for the great work demanded his attention, but he carried Grace's words with him, held them close in the deepest part of his mind. The activation day arrived 3 months later. Cole stood at the center of a machine that spanned light years, a construct built by every species working together for a decade. Trillions of beings across the galaxy watched through sensors and screens as he raised his hands. His golden eyes blazed with a light that had not been seen since the architects themselves walked among the stars. The machine came to life around him. Energy flowed through crystalline matrices and along currents of folded spacetime. The Krethbelt components hummed with precision. The monumental materials held firm against forces that would have torn planets apart. The shade-carried connections linked everything together into a single functioning whole. And at the center of it all, Cole reached out with his mind and touched the fabric of existence itself. He could feel the collapse, the places where reality had worn thin and frayed. He could feel the edges of the universe where stars had already been swallowed by nothingness, and he could feel the solution working. The energy of the great machine flowing into those wounds, healing them. strengthening the laws that held everything together, but the collapse had progressed further than anyone had known. The damage was greater than the architects had predicted. The machine was working, but it was not enough. Cole understood what he had to do. He had always known on some level that this moment would come. The architects had designed the solution to require a final component, something their own civilization had lacked. They had needed someone to bridge the gap between the machine and the universe itself. Someone whose consciousness could merge with reality and guide the healing from within. They had needed a sacrifice. Cole did not hesitate. He had been raised by Grace Holloway, a woman who had spent her entire life caring for others without asking for anything in return. He had grown up on Vega Station, among humans who worked themselves to exhaustion to build a better life for their children. He was a child of humanity, and humanity had never been afraid to give everything for the ones they loved. He let go of his body. He released his hold on individual existence and allowed his consciousness to expand outward. Flowing through the machine, becoming one with the energy that was healing the universe, it was not painful. It was like stepping through a door into a vast and beautiful room, a place where he could see everything that had ever been and everything that would ever be. The collapse stopped. The fraying edges of reality stabilized and began to mend. Stars that had been dying reignited with fresh fuel. Black holes that had been consuming all light began to radiate warmth. The fundamental constants of existence shifted, not toward entropy and dissolution, but toward renewal and growth. Cole Archer, the human orphan with golden eyes, died on the day he saved the universe, but he did not truly end. His consciousness dispersed through the fabric of reality itself, woven into the laws that held existence together. Every star carried a trace of his presence. Every atom remembered the boy from Vega Station who had become something more than human. He was not a god, not a spirit, not a ghost. He was simply there in everything, forever. The great work was complete in the years that followed. The galaxy mourned and celebrated in equal measure. The unity that Cole had helped create endured, not because anyone forced it to, but because the beings who had worked together to save existence had learned to see each other as family. Old hatreds faded. New friendships formed. The universe entered an age of peace and discovery that would last for millions of years. Humanity was no longer tolerated or overlooked. They were respected, even revered, as the species that had produced the bridge. The one who had given everything so that everything else could survive. But more importantly, they were still human. Still messy and chaotic and gloriously unpredictable. Still fixing things that were broken and dreaming of things that did not exist. Grace Holloway lived for another 12 years after Cole's sacrifice. She spent those years telling stories about the boy she had raised, not as a legend or a myth, but as a person. She talked about how he had loved to read, how he had struggled with making friends, how he'd once cried for 3 days when a mining accident killed one of the workers he had known. She made sure that people remembered Cole as a human being, not just as a savior. When she died, she was buried on Vega Station in a small cemetery overlooking the stars. Her gravestone read simply, Grace Holloway, Mother of the Bridge, and somewhere beyond the boundaries of existence, in a place where consciousness merged. With infinity, a being who had once been called Cole smiled with eyes of gold. The universe was young again. Reality was strong and growing stronger. Life spread across galaxies that had never known it before, exploring wonders that the architects themselves had never imagined. The collapse had been defeated not by the power of gods, but by the choice of a single human to give everything he had. The architects, watching from wherever they had gone, were proud. Their final children had exceeded every expectation. Their last experiment had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and Cole was at peace. Woven into the stars, a part of everything beautiful that would ever exist, the story of the orphan with golden eyes would be told for as long as anyone remembered how to speak. It would change in the telling, as all stories do, becoming more legend than history. But the truth at its heart would never change. A human had saved the universe, not through conquest or dominance, but through sacrifice and love, and that, in the end, was what it meant to be human.